Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well, and it's time for another edition of the Let's Argue, where I take your hot takes, your unpopular opinions, and your tough questions off of our Patreon page, because this is a patron-only episode. Thank you. Big thank you, by the way, for being a part of our Patreon page. Greatly appreciated, obviously. And basically taking your stuff straight off the page, responding, answering, giving my takes in return with a little side of love. I've tried many times to comprehend how you hear Lil Baby as a Young Thug clone. I understand that he comes from the scene that Young Thug inspired, but Thug is such a different voice. Lil Baby is as much or more a Wayne/Future clone rather than Thug. It's hard for me to see Baby as a Wayne clone in any way, shape, or form because Thugger, in a way, is copying so many sounds and ideas from Wayne. I mean, he sort of burst onto the scene getting so many Wayne comparisons from the timbre of his voice and the way that he sung and sort of the elasticity of his voice too. I find it even harder to go directly to Wayne because, even though I guess Young Thug lacks the lyrical wit or the one-liners of Wayne, I think Lil Baby is even further off that mark. And honestly, I think vocally, and what Lil Baby does with autotune is much more just in line with what Young Thug does with it. The warbliness of the voice, the vocal runs. And look, I mean, just because I feel he is a clone in at least some respects, doesn't mean he's exactly close to the real thing. Which I think is also the case for Gunna too. I mean, they're two artists that sort of came up around the same time and are borrowing a lot of ideas very clearly from Young Thug, who, look, I mean, there are Future clones out there, there are Earl clones out there are Thugger clones out there. There are people out there who I think sound just like Future. I think a guy like Moneybagg Yo borrows quite a bit from Future. And I suppose there's an argument to be made that Lil Baby does share some similarities with Future too. But if I had to throw, these artists into a certain category based on who they're cloning, Lil Baby sonically to me, he just reminds me a little bit more of Thugger. People discrediting artists because they sound like another artist without understanding the history of the artist/genre is getting out of hand. I saw someone call A.G. Cook a 100 gecs ripoff when they were listening to Apple, and I was going to lose my mind. Were you in the live stream? We listened to this during a New Music Friday stream, the new A.G. Cook LP, and there were lots of people like comparing it to gecs, totally ignoring the fact that gecs obviously borrows from PC music, and PC music came onto the scene long before gecs did. And for some reason, just people are totally ignorant of the history and the connections and the progressions. I mean, it's one thing to make a comparison when one artist comes after the other, or at least one artist sort of forged a sound in their own way prior to, because obviously older artists can be inspired by newer sounds. But still, having said that, it was kind of disheartening to see that and annoying. And it is mind-boggling and upsetting in a sense. But, not everybody is going to hear everything. Not everybody knows everything. There are art forms and mediums that I am as ignorant toward because I don't follow them that deeply either. But I don't know if you would ever catch me in like a movie chat room saying like, it's just a Hunger Games ripoff, man. You're just ripping off the Hunger Games. Is there an age where rappers should drop the Lil or Young from their name like Jeezy? Because who wants to be the 65-year-old retired rapper who's called Young in a sea of primarily teenage young adult rappers? I don't know if it really applies all that much to the Lil, because there are some people who call themselves Lil because they're Lil. I mean, if you look at Lil Wayne and you look up his height, he's not a tall man. So there are some people who literally just have that kind of attached to their name because they're small, or they're kind of jokingly called that way because they're actually big. And there are some rappers who are really big and they have big, in front of their rap name. So or they have big in their rap name. So I don't think it so much applies to the Lil or the Big unless you somehow earned your rap name when you were like 11 or 12 and then you sort of like hit puberty and grew from there. If you're someone who is short in stature, I think the Lil gets a pass. But if you're someone who, has the Young in there, and I don't know, you're aging, maybe not so gracefully, then yeah, it's at some point maybe you should drop it. Maybe it makes sense to drop it. Because you're not young forever, maybe you should sort of drop it at some point, or just throw old in there. Though there was Old Dirty Bastard, who, when he called himself an old dirty bastard, he wasn't really that old. I think at the end of the day, it sort of matters how you feel on the inside. You know, if it 45, 55, you're still rapping or you're retired, but you still feel young at heart, I mean, and you want to call yourself young, I'd say go for it. You have one of the hardest jobs because your fan base is hostile towards you more than most on the net, on top of dealing with hate from non-fans. Melon heads are whack, hate to say it. It is sort of weird because I feel like there's always been sort of like a crowd of people who hate me. As my profile grows, that crowd of people who hates me grows. And then as the people who follow me and subscribe to me and I guess in a way care about what I do, you know, as that grows, there's also like a loud contingent within that group of people who hate me or hate most of the things that I say. And then there's, I'm sure, you know, tons of people out there who like me and appreciate me and, you know, enjoy my content. But, you know, usually they sort of show their enjoyment through silence, or they're kind of conscious of the fact that, you know, if I've said an opinion that people don't like, that defending me is not cool because the internet has made it uncool to be a Fantano viewer, and Fantano fans are whack. All they do is agree with everything Fantano says. So that's the stereotype. So the moment that you come out to defend me, you become conscious of that. So you're not sort of like jumping out there to be like, oh, but Anthony was right, or Anthony has a point, or blah, blah, blah. And look, not that I need that defense. I'm just saying that, like, you know, it doesn't come up for a reason, because there's sort of like, you know, a view or a stigma or just sort of like a general opinion or a take that it's not entirely necessary. I don't need to white knight for Anthony. I don't need to cape for Anthony. You know, he's a grown-ass man, which I am. You know, you're free to sort of throw your opinions or unhappiness at me over my reviews. I don't need anyone protecting me from that. That's fine. If I didn't want to deal with that, I could just quit my job. If it was so bad at the end of the day that I didn't want to see negative opinions about me anymore, I would just get off the internet and not upload a single video to YouTube ever again. But honestly, I like sharing the musical experience with you guys. For the people that do rock with me, I do like listening to new music. I do like analyzing new music. I do like kind of, you know, stirring the pot a little bit and putting my thoughts out there, seeing other people's thoughts. I like that process, even if, you know, through that process, I do get a lot of negativity. But I don't know. It's sort of worth it because at the end of the day, I think, you know, it's music is great. Music is wonderful. Music is fantastic. And, you know, there's probably a lot of value at the end of the day in sort of, you know, becoming an instrument of teaching people that everyone has an opinion and it's not a big deal and you don't need to get mad about it. Anthony Fantano is to music what Anthony Bourdain was to travel/food. Well, Anthony Bourdain was also like a food maker guy. Maybe I need like a decade of production experience under my belt, and not like, you know, just like producing anything. I mean, like, you know, being the guy in the studio, you know, doing this, saying that, suggesting this, doing the other thing. It's funny, I actually have, like, just before the pandemic started, I got an offer to do a weird show like that, where I go to like the different venues and I sort of like talk about the music history of those venues. And I also got an offer to go to a studio with a musician who was putting out, you know, the one who I've reviewed and a lot of you know, to go to the studio and sort of like go over tracks that they were planning on putting onto their new record and sort of give thoughts on that. And I was being told that I would be given credit for that if there was some kind of credit to give. And you know, but I guess COVID really just like kind of fucked up my whole Anthony Bourdain trajectory over here. I was about to be the Anthony Bourdain of music, and now I'm just the fucking Anthony Fantano of music. What the fuck? Most quarantine albums from this year have done very little to reflect the actual impact that the pandemic has had / is having on society. I mean, I think How I'm Feeling Now is a lot of fun, but its quarantine commentary just boils down to I miss going out. Yeah, kind of true. I mean, I think as far as a quarantine album, it makes sense when you're talking about the first leg of the quarantine, when that's maybe how most people were feeling. Now everyone who was originally feeling that way is going psychotic, scared for their lives, and also know people who are dying of COVID, also know people who are in food lines, also know people people who are losing their place to live, also know people who are just completely losing their livelihoods. Yeah, I would say it maybe works as kind of the first section of, quarantine commentary, but doesn't really function beyond that. I've talked to a lot of musicians about this whole quarantine and everything, and, they feel like creatively and just in a grander scheme of things too, in terms of just putting out music, making music, not just writing it or conceiving it, but just kind of stop dead in their tracks essentially. And I feel fortunate that I have any music to talk about from week to week. Honestly, it's slowed down a little, but the fact that there's still music out there to talk about, listen to, I feel fortunate that even that's out there. Tears for Fears is easily a top 3 synth pop group of the 80s. Well, for me, it's Depeche Mode, it's New Order, okay, and then you have that third spot. And in that third spot, I suppose there is a Tears for Fears argument, because the music that they did put out was so huge, so massive, so dominant that I guess, again, it is arguable to put them in that position. However, you cannot deny that in terms of like the volume of music released, high quality synth pop music during the 80s, Simple Minds had a more impressive run. Yellow Magic Orchestra also had a more impressive run, and Pet Shop Boys also had a more impressive run. I would say I enjoy Tears for Fears more than Pet Shop Boys. I would say I enjoy probably Yellow Magic Orchestra a little bit more than Tears for Fears. And Simple Minds, I mean, I'm neutral on some of the time. I like some of their stuff quite a bit, but I know that they have more consistent discography around that decade. So I don't know. I feel like I think the third spot is contested. I think the third spot's contested. I don't think it's an easy in. Coheed and Cambria is one of the most underappreciated bands of the 21st century. Sure, they can be a bit off-putting and somewhat cheesy to some people, but they're all extremely talented musicians. Their music strikes a good balance between technical and soulful. Just don't think they get the credit they deserve, man. I mean, if you feel that way, you feel that way. I know they had a pretty popular run when I was back in college, when I first discovered them, because they did have a lot of fans, some of which were my friends at the radio station who just kind of dug their stuff, and I could not get into them then. I cannot get into them now. I can't stand the vocals. I don't like the songwriting part of the time either. It's just a really kind of difficult listen for me much of the time when it comes to Coheed, but I'm glad you like them. AJR isn't as bad as you say they are. Admittedly, I did have to Stockholm Syndrome myself into liking them by listening to Neo Theater daily for a week, but their production is really inventive, and if you don't think too hard about the lyrics, a lot of their songs are pretty infectious and anthemic. Karma is one that proves they're more than just another boy band. Look, I have no doubt that a lot of people find their songs catchy, or maybe even that I would find their songs catchy if I listen to them over and over and over. But, it still remains that aesthetically, I find their stuff to be garbage. I think the vocals are garbage. I think the instrumental palettes are annoying and bland. I think a lot of their writing is cliche. And look, if I'm gonna critique their music, if I'm going to give a fair assessment of their tracks, I can't ignore the lyrics. I mean, if you're a casual listener and you just want to vibe out to something, I mean, fucking sure, ignore the lyrics. In fact, most listeners ignore the lyrics of most songs. It's not a big deal. If you want to ignore the lyrics, that's cool, but that's not something I could ignore. So that's another one of the things that I don't like about their music at all. So, I don't know. I know they can write songs. I know they got structures, and I know they can put out a hook too, but it's everything else about their music that I find terrible. Texture and timbre, personality, songwriting, musicianship. I mean, this is it's agreeable. I think songwriting is better than personality, and I would argue that songwriting is, in a lot of cases, more important than texture and timbre too. However, you can have an okay song made up for by texture and timbre and, personality being great. I don't know, songwriting I think is pretty significant. Songwriting is definitely not third in my view. Like, it definitely comes over personality, because there are a lot of people out there with personality and garbage songwriting, and it only gets them so far. As soon as you hear them open their mouths, you know exactly who they are. That's personality. But if your songs are shit, your songs are shit. If I had to switch any of two things in this list, it would be those two things, personality and songwriting. Who's scarier, MC Ride or Michael Gira? I don't find either of them particularly scary because I'm sure at the end of the day, like they're both chill guys. They're both, you know, kind of just artistic, deep thinky type guys who just happen to make very visceral music and have very visceral performances. But I've seen both of them perform, and I've seen both those dudes in beast mode. I guess from there I'd have to say, whose beast mode do I find scarier? Or if I had to fight one of them while they were in beast mode, which one do I think I could beat? Who would I be more afraid to fight? I don't know. I think I'd be more afraid to fight Ride, honestly. Like I feel like Michael, he's an old man. He's an old man at this point. Just knock his 10-gallon hat off his head. All right, that's all I'm saying. I don't know what, you know, Michael was like in his prime though. You guys are getting me into trouble with these questions over here. Stop asking them. But you're the best. I love you. I hope you have a good one. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I gave some coherent responses to your questions. Some quite lengthy ones on this one. Well, lengthier than I thought I was gonna, but hey, there we go. Love you. Love you, love you, love you. Anthony Fantano, let's argue forever.